Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's class on drawing lips using the planes of the face. I'm your instructor, Adrienne Hodge, and this is sort of the end of a series I've been doing all summer long on drawing different parts of the face, different facial features using the planes of the face, which is basically contour lines or elevational lines that follow those three-dimensional dips and curves across the planes of the face. So we had four previous classes this summer. In June, we had two classes on drawing eyes using the planes of the face in a variety of materials. And then in July, we did two classes on drawing noses using the planes of the face. And I know several of you have been here for are my, regulars who come back to all the classes. But for those of you just joining tonight, there's a standalone class. But if you want to go back and check out those other classes on YouTube, you can do that later. They're not necessary to have watched those classes to watch tonight's class or to participate. And but I just might be referring back to some of the content from those classes as we go along. And then next week's class is on tips and tricks for urban sketching. And I don't have the example for that class right in front of me, but you can sign up for that class where you signed up for tonight's class on the Michaels website. And that should be a lot of fun. I'm going to be, like this class tonight, I'll provide reference images for that class. And we've had classes on urban sketching before, but this one is going to be like a very brief kind of tutorial on like quick tips and tricks to like get your urban sketching practice flowing quickly. So stay tuned for that next Wednesday. And I'm going to go ahead and switch to my tabletop view and go over supplies, and we'll get started tonight. Right, don't forget to tag your work with those hashtags, Make It With Michaels or Michaels Classes, and you can follow me on Instagram at Adrienne Hodge Art. Chanel also has my link tree that she can drop in the chat, and you can see what online classes I might have coming up, or maybe some in-person classes. In Austin, if you're in the Austin area, registration just opened yesterday for fall classes where I teach in person in Austin at the Contemporary. And yeah, so I've got some other stuff going on outside of these Michaels classes, and I also have a link to sign up for Michaels classes on my link tree as well. Okay, and here's my business card. I'm also on Facebook, Adrienne Hodge Fine Art. And I'll go ahead and put those away. And so here's what we might have by the end of the class tonight. Results may vary, but we're going to cover 3 different sketches using graphite pencils of looking at the planes of the face surrounding the lips, and then the value shapes of rendering the value shapes necessary to rendering those 3-dimensional forms of the lips across those planes of the face, and then we'll combine the two. So we'll be combining them in all 3 of our sketches, but we might have something that looks like that. And I'm using Artist Loft supplies. So I've got a set of Artist Loft sketching pencils, and I think from this necessities pack, I've got a couple of different packs here, and then I've got a synthetic eraser, and I've also got a kneaded eraser here as well. And then I have an Artist Loft drawing pad that looks like this. And I provided these reference photos in a PDF document. So we've got 3 different photographs here, and I've got the true color version of the photograph, the black and white version of the photograph, and then an inverted version for each one of these. They might not be in perfect order here, I just realized. And then, or no, yeah, they are. And that looked like a different one for some reason. This is the photo above, just inverted. So all the lights are showing up dark, and all of the darks are showing up light. And then same thing for this next photo. I've got the true color, the black and white, and then the inverted version of that photo. And then same thing for the third one. Okay, so I'm just gonna pull out some of the examples from the other classes on drawing eyes just to review a little bit, and also go over one key concept in looking at the planes of the face. So this was our class on drawing expressive eyes using the planes of the face. So in all of these classes, we're looking at the contours lines, the elevational lines that fall across these three-dimensional shifts of the face. And then we're also looking at the value, so that scale from light to dark, and then combining those. And we've used a variety of materials to do this. So we were using some charcoal, some chalk pastel pencils to do this with the nose. And we got into some color a little bit in the nose class. And tonight we're just sticking to graphite for this, but one thing I just wanted to go over here is this. So I mentioned a book, Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain by Betty Edwards, which is a great book to check out in one of these other classes in this series, and that can really help you to, the main phrase, the main like thesis statement of that book is draw what you see, not what you think you see. So throughout these classes, I've been talking about how what we tend to do when we draw from our imagination is we're drawing symbols, and we all have symbols for different things in our minds, in our mind's eye. From when we were children, especially, we learned these symbols. Like this is a symbol for a house, this is a symbol for a tree, little pie slice sun in the corner of the sky. Those are all symbols. And we do the same thing oftentimes when it comes to the face. So when we draw these hard lines around the face, what we are telling the viewer is that you're looking at something flat. You're looking at something two-dimensional here, and it's got a hard line around it, like a hard shape. So you're telling me that this nose is more like a triangle, which is a two-dimensional shape. And we know that noses are not flat. They are not flat two-dimensional shapes with hard lines around them. They are three-dimensional forms. So what we really want to look for is these, elevational shifts across these three-dimensional forms. Like this would be the contour lines on a cylinder. And on a cylinder, the directional curve of these contour lines is going to shift depending on if you're looking down at the cylinder or if you're looking up at the cylinder. This is a cone, which we could say that the nose imitates more of a cone, right? Or the nose could even have more of a cylindrical shape to it. And same thing, these elevational lines are going to shift depending on our perspective or our point of view as we're viewing them. And then we're going to see different values across it. So we've got this value scale from 0 to 10, 10 being our absolute dark, 0 being our absolute light, or maybe blank paper. If we were working with pen, we would have to leave that light blank. And then we want to have, this soft like shift between that value scale from 0 to 10. And so we talked about how the eyes are not this perfectly flat almond shape, and we got into that with the eyes. We talked about how the nose is more of a cone, or maybe a combination of a cone and a cylinder and a sphere. We've got all three of them really happening on the nose. If I pull out my little nose diagram again here, you can easily see how we could interpret parts of the nose as cylindrical, parts of it as cone shaped, and then parts of it as spherical shaped. So with the lips, we're looking at a combination of these basic forms as well. We've definitely got some spherical shapes happening on the lips. We've got these, round, bulbous shapes happening on the bottom lip, especially, and the top lip. And then we've also got something that feels a little cylindrical in some places too, maybe like a cylinder turned on its side. And then there's a bit of a inverted cone when we're looking at that little cleft above the lips. So we've got a combination of a few different elevational curves happening with these shapes. So first of all, we're just going to break down the lips into these contour shapes. And oops, accidentally smeared some of my graphite here. And I knew when this class rolled around, this was going to be a tricky one using just graphite for it, because historically, when I do a class that's just graphite on Zoom, it's always a little tricky at first because I'm going to be drawing really lightly to begin. And so you might have a hard time seeing my lines right off the bat. So I'm going to go a little bigger on this piece of paper so that hopefully they'll show up. Let me find a nice blank page here. Like here's from the strawberry class we did a while back, painting a strawberry in watercolor, gouache, and ink. We're basically doing this, but for the lips here. Big for this first drawing, and I'm going to use a pretty dark pencil right off the bat, just so that my lines will show up on the Zoom. But you should probably start with something like a 2H or maybe a 4H or an HB, something with an H in it, nice and light, so that you can easily erase your lines and you don't get too attached to your lines. And you want to have your pencil on its side, and you want to use your whole arm movement as you are sketching nice and light, and you're finding these shapes so that you can easily erase. As long as your pencil is kind of on its side and you're not putting a lot of pressure on it, you're going to have nice light lines that are going to be easy to erase. And you can ask me for a class to reference that concept if that's new to you, and Chanel can maybe find the link to that class on Intro to Graphite or Beginner's Guide to Graphite if anybody has any questions about that idea. Okay, so first of all, we are just looking for these elevational dips and curves and these basic shapes. So let's start out with a couple of circles right next to each other. And then we're going to put a couple of other circles underneath that are slightly bigger. So we've got 4 circles on top of each other, okay? And then we're going to go above these. Maybe you're not going to be proportional to looking exactly like the lips that we're looking at here. And actually, sorry, let me scroll up. We're going to look at this first set of lips, which are my daughter's lips here. Okay, so there is kind of a roundish circular or spherical shape happening underneath this meaty part of the lips here. And I just realized that's something on my iPad that's dragging across my page there. Okay, so just looking at this elevational shift in these contours, and then we're going to taper it off here on the side and add a couple of triangles. So a triangle above, a triangle off to the side here, and then another triangle over here. And then we're going to have a rounded shape like this underneath. Well, we're not going to close that in. We're going to leave that kind of open-ended. So like a little half, like a big smiley face, big emoji smiley face. And we're just going to do something like that for now. Okay. And then we're going to start to look at how these curves are happening. So let's look right here in the middle and notice how there is a bit of an equator line down the center here where we have a curve in the opposite direction on either side. So just like our 2 spheres that are happening, we've got a curve here on this sphere and a curve going that way on this sphere. So the curves are alternating out in opposite directions. And then there's a bit of an equator line down the center here. And it's not super obvious. I'm kind of exaggerating it a little more than is necessary, but there's another equator line on the opposite end of our sphere here. So across the sphere, there's even another line where it appears a little more straight, and then the curve starts to bulge out in the other direction. And then the curve is going to stay curving in that same direction on either side. So something like that. Okay, and then on the horizontal axis here, we can even see this little ridge where it starts to, and I'm going to erase some of these lines because I think I'm like trying to make it go across those spheres a little too much. I'm just going to notice like how they're not quite that severe. I was exaggerating them so that they could be a little more obvious to you. We can see this little ridge across the upper lip here where there is that elevational shift where it actually is a little more like a cylinder than a sphere here. So we can see this little ridge right here. And it's not a perfectly straight line, just like the lines that are curving across the more spherical shape on the bulge of the lips is not perfectly spherical. It's just a general idea here of what the contours are doing. And it's kind of following the same line as what we might see at the center of the lips. And then again, it's not perfect. It dips down. And it sort of melts into the skin of the face over here, tapers off. So it's not perfect, but we're just noticing what these shifts are doing. And it maybe even might, do something like this right here. So it's not following this like perfect path across a cylinder. You have to really note and notice where these elevational shifts are occurring on this particular person's lips. And all of these ways that our faces dip and curve and deviate from each other in the way that they, follow these different elevational shifts. This is what gives us our likeness, what makes us look like us. So noticing where on this particular person's lips these dips and curves happen is what's going to help you achieve likeness and capture something that looks like that person. And you can see even like little wrinkles across the skin on the lips in a photo like this. We can see like tiny little hairs. All those things can really help you to capture the specific likeness of the person that you're drawing, which this happens to be my daughter right here. And then the next two pictures are my lips. Okay, but that's basically what we're going for, is just looking for that elevational shift and curve that's happening. And it maybe falls across a couple of more spherical shapes on the top lip, but it's not perfect circles. There are these little like ridges that we can follow, these little creases and wrinkles, and noticing those are going to help us to capture something that looks more like the person that we're drawing. And then we're looking for this dip above the lips. I know this is really cut off here. Let's see, is there more of it showing in the other picture? I think there was a really heavy shadow under her lip in the photograph, so I was trying to cut that off. We'll get more into this area for sure on the other photographs that we're using, because I know I included more of that in those photographs. But we're looking for this little valley, this peak and valley that's happening across the contours here. And we're just following that curve across the skin of the face as we're seeing it. So like I said, it's a bit of an inverted cone here in the middle. So if we think about the inside of a cone being alternated, like if we were looking at the outside of a cone, it would look like this, right? The cone is coming towards us, but it might look the same way if we were looking at the inside of a cone, right? If we just kind of shift our perspective, I'm like, honestly, if I draw it, it's like the curve is, it's the same, but you just have to switch your brain into thinking I'm looking at the inside of the cone versus the outside of the cone. It's a bit of an optical illusion there. Okay, so let's look at this bottom lip. And again, we can think about two circles underneath here for this like meteor aspect that's happening. But then I'm going to actually erase those circles because I don't want to get too attached to them, but they definitely can help us get this more rounded feeling of the lips. And in this photo, again, we can really see some wrinkles and ridges across the skin of the lips that describe what the contours are doing. Like I can see an actual line right there in the bottom part of the lip that curves like this. And I can see this outward curve to some of the lines going in the other direction. And then same thing on the opposite side of the lips, I can see a curve going out the other way. So we're just looking for that curved understanding of something that feels a little bit more like a cylinder here. And then on the horizontal axis, I'm going to draw this light shape that I see, this reflective light on the lips, because that is following that horizontal path that we need right there. And then above that, we've got that shadow, but that shadow is also following that horizontal path. And it's not a perfectly straight horizontal line. It's curving out, just like the bottom of our lips might curve. Okay, and then if we wanted to add some of the value that we're seeing on top of that, I'm looking for these shapes of shadows, and all of these shadowy shapes are following these contours that we just drew. So we're looking for a shape that goes along this path that we just added. And just outlined the path, and then now this big shadow is falling all across that path. And then I'm going to take the side of my pencil and just start to fill in some of that value. And when I'm trying to get people away from this idea of drawing hard lines around the lips, I love to say how lips are like butter melting on a piece of toast. They just kind of melt into the skin of the face. And oftentimes the skin of the lips is the same color as the skin of the face, especially like right here. And anybody who's ever tried to put on lip liner knows it's hard to know where to stop. Where's that outer line for the edge of the lips, right? And I often will ask people in an in-person class when people can respond to me a little more. I know, well, actually, let me have y'all do this in the chat. If we're thinking about that value scale from 0 to 10, 10 being the absolute black and 0 being the absolute white, where do y'all see like an absolute 10 on the value scale here? Like we're going to shade this as dark as we can with our pencil on these particular lips. Where do we see an absolute 10? Or Patty's saying 8. Okay, I like that. Like the main part of the shadow feels more like an 8. That's good. That was another question I was going to say is what's the darkest shadow that we're seeing? So yeah, Patty's saying it's more of an 8. I would agree. It doesn't really go all the way to black except for maybe, yeah, Sue said it in the right corner. Thank you, Sue. And then that's maybe it, like maybe a tiny bit over here, but the rest of it is, yeah, more of like an 8, or here I would put it at maybe in more of an 8 in this big shadow. Okay, so if we were to put a hard line all the way around these lips like this, if we were to do this, then you're telling me it's a hard 10 all the way around the lips, right? And that's not what we're seeing. So we want to figure out where we do go all the way to 10. Where do we put our pressure down on our pencil and really fill in that 10 value? And it might be that we exaggerate it a little bit, like maybe here down the center line, there might be more of like pressing down on my pencil and it maybe feels like more of a 9 or a 10 just to exaggerate it. But definitely not around the entire shape of the lips here. We're not going to do that. And I'm going to fill this in with a soft, like 7 or 8 value here on the value scale and up here in this shadow. And then we want to get that big shadow that we're seeing underneath the lips in there. And that's going to help the light come forward by pushing that shadow so dark, like we're seeing it where we do see it. And then we're going to go ahead and move on to some of the other lips here. But if we were going to add a little more value, we would want like a lighter value. Like maybe we take one of our H pencils or like a 2B and we build up. Let's see. We use a 2B here and just start to like build up some of this softer value. Like I'm seeing it in other shadow parts. And that's how we're going to start to create that depth and make parts of the lips come forward. And then parts of the lips go back. So by adding this value here, that's going to make that light come forward, that we're seeing that reflective light. But you want to make your value follow these contours. All right, I think that's pretty good for our first drawing here. So I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next one. And we didn't focus too much on the details of this one too much, but if you were to continue developing that, you could maybe do it again. And with this photo, I turned up the contrast on the black and white to exaggerate those shadows so that they do show up more as 10s on the value scale. And that could help you, to really exaggerate and create some drama in a sketch. And then that one I just played with the contrast and I had a couple of different versions of it. And then this one, I inverted it so that all the light is showing up dark, all the dark is showing up light. And that can maybe help you to see some of those details as well, and help you to see those shapes. Okay, moving on to this next set of lips. Got this photograph of my lips here, and it's a bit of a 3/4 view of my face. So my face is turned to the side slightly. And I'm like, wait a second, I'm looking at my my example from the oh, okay, that's the one that I did last. So I guess let me look at the other photograph for yeah, this is the one I did in the middle. So we'll look at this one next, and then we'll do the 3/4 view one last. Okay, so with this photograph, I want us we're still going to keep in mind the contours. And if you want to draw the contours first, then by all means do that. But I want us to kind of take the training wheels off as an exercise to practice with the value. But as we're adding the value, we're going to follow just the value shapes here. I want you to think about the value following those 3-dimensional curves. So if you need the lines, if you want to draw these elevational lines again first, then do that. But I'm not going to do that this time. I'm going to just draw the value shapes that I'm seeing. And we're going to, mainly because there's a lot of light happening here. And I want us to really go pretty lightly with these H pencils and get that light value to come forward by what we don't draw. And if we have those lines underneath, it might make it tricky to do that, but you do that if you need that kind of scaffolding line. And I have the black and white version of this one, and then I have the inverted light version of this one as well. So I want to look at the inverted light photo first and use that to draw these empty value shapes. So we're not going to fill in the value shapes at first. We're just going to sketch the shapes of the shadows and the shapes of the light. And I'm going to start out with a very light pencil, like an H or a 2H. And just bear with me if you cannot see my lines at first. Once I, get the lines where I want them to be, I will make them darker. Sometimes this graphite just does not show up on Zoom, and people will let me know in the chat when they can't see my lines, and I'm very aware that it's an issue. So I'm looking at this light shape in the center of the lip. So it's showing up as searing white in the inverted light photo, but that means that that is actually where it's pretty dark at the center of the lips. So if you want to look at the black and white photo, if that makes it easier to see it, or the full color photo, but I'm just looking for this double-sided shape. And in the inverted light photo, it makes it seem like it's bigger than in the other ones because it kind of lumps all those shadows into one big block of light here when it inverts it. But that makes it easier, I think, to see. How it's a double-sided shape. And I like to make a little bit of a game for myself out of this, where I say, when I'm drawing a face, I gamify it a little bit by saying, I'm going to draw this face and I'm not going to draw a line. Like, there cannot be any lines by themselves. Oh my goodness, I have my phone on Do Not Disturb, but there's one person who gets through and they're texting me right now. So I'm looking for a shape. I'm looking for an other side of this shape. So where it goes to 10 on the value scale in the center of the lips is more of a two-sided shape here. And don't expect you to get this perfect, but we're just looking for how it kind of dips and curves within that larger shape. I'm looking at the black and white version of it right now to see how it does something like that. Okay, and then there's a bigger shape around it, and that was the one that was showing up all white in the inverted light photo. Okay, and sometimes it helps to turn this upside down. That's part of the drawing on the right side of the brain book that's so helpful, is all these different ways that you can disconnect from that critical voice in your head that's saying that doesn't look right, that doesn't look like lips, whatever that voice is saying to you, you can turn it off sometimes by doing things like turning your drawing upside down. So if that helps you to do that and draw these shapes in that way, then you might do that. Okay, now I'm looking for this big shape of light that I'm seeing underneath the shadow part of the lips. This is more of like the reflective light. And there's some ridges in it. So it looks like little squares or rectangles of light. It's not perfect, it's very organic, little triangles and rectangles like this. And if you can't see my lines yet, please just be patient with me as I I'm sure someone's going to start to say it in the chat. Okay, yeah. Thank you, Chanel. It'll get easier it'll get easier to see my lines as soon as I start to darken my lines. So if you feel like you can't draw them until you see me draw them, just wait, hang out a minute, and then when I make them a little darker, you'll be able to see them. But I'm looking at these shapes. And if you've got a printout of these photos, sometimes it helps to like outline things on the photograph if you're having a hard time seeing these shapes. And yeah, turning it upside down maybe can help. Turn the photograph upside down, turn your drawing upside down, and draw them upside down. So I'll go ahead and darken some of the shadows that I'm seeing here so that it starts to come across. So in between those little rectangles and triangles that I just drew, I am seeing these shadows. They're not quite this dark. Lighten them a little bit. I'm making them dark because I'm trying to make sure y'all can see them, but I'm using an H pencil on its side just to fill those in a little bit here and just noticing these little ridges in between. Maybe that'll help you to see them, or just be patient. Let's just be patient. Once I start to darken things up, you'll be able to see. Okay, because I want to draw the shapes empty first, honestly. And the reason I like to draw them empty first is because then I can assess if they look correct, and then I can start to fill them in. If I start to fill them in too soon, I might need to make an adjustment. They might not be in the right place. So I'm just looking for all these organic shapes. And sometimes it helps to call them something other than what they are. Like a famous one from an in-person class recently, I said it looked like a baby dragon as a shadow underneath a nose. But like looking at this shadow right here, it kind of looks like a wiener dog. That's what I'm seeing. It's like a wiener dog right here. Do y'all see that? Maybe not. But then there's a really long nose on the wiener dog. I don't know. It's silly, but it helps because sometimes naming it as something other than what it is can make it easier to draw. If I say I'm drawing a wiener dog with a really long nose, that's somehow easier than saying I'm drawing this organic shadow on the bottom of my lip. And then similarly, I've got another organic shadow underneath the lip. That's the one I'm on now. And if you just don't see these shapes yourself in your drawing and you're relying on copying the shapes that I'm drawing, just hang out for just a minute and I'll add some shadows to them and you'll be able to see these shapes a little better. I'm just looking for all these wonky, wobbly, organic shapes. So I've got the bottom lip filled in, and I mean, honestly, it looks like the inside of a cave or something right now, and like stalagmites and stalactites dripping down. That's what it looks like. That's what I feel like I've just drawn, is the inside of a cave. But it's all that reflective light on that bottom lip. Okay, and then on the top lip, and they are following those contours that we talked about just by default of looking at the shape. So that's just something I want to point out by drawing it this way, is that you don't necessarily have to have an understanding of the contour lines as long as you are looking at the light, because the light is telling you everything you need to know. Okay, so on the top lip, there's a bunch of little circles of reflective light and shadow happening here. There's an interesting ridge that goes this direction on this side, and then a little bit more of this direction on this side. And my lips are very asymmetrical. Most people's faces are very asymmetrical. It's rare to have a person whose face is more symmetrical. They're out there though, and it's fun to, if you want to Google celebrities with symmetrical faces or asymmetrical faces, and check those out. That's fun to look at and to notice which celebrities have more symmetrical faces versus asymmetrical. But one side of my lip goes up much higher than the other side. So I've got that shape in there. Okay, and then this tapers off. All right, so I've got all those shapes now. And there is a little bit of a shadow here where that cone, that inverted cone is on the top lip. And then there's also a bit of a shadow underneath the lips. I can put that in slightly. Okay, now I'm gonna start with the 10 values and start to fill in some of those 10s. I mean, first I can look at it and I can say, well, does that look right? Do I need to make any adjustments? And the easiest way to not worry about making lines that can't be erased is to just never use the front of your pencil until you are certain that you've got the values where you want them. Because the second I start using the front of my pencil, the top of my pencil, and I press down and embed it into the paper like this, it's going to be harder to erase. So I'm just going to demonstrate that on the side. If I use the side of my pencil and put some value in there, I can get it pretty dark. I should still be able to get most of that off the page. But if I take the front of my pencil and press down, that's a little harder to get rid of. Okay, so that's just the difference in using the side of the pencil and the front of the pencil. Okay, so as long as I use the side of my pencil, I should be able to fill in these shapes without committing to anything too much here, and start to see if I put these organic shapes in the right place. And this is always a little magical if you drew it upside down, especially, to then start to fill it in like this and realize, oh, hey, yeah, the light is telling us everything we need to know. These lips are going to just sort of develop like a photograph in a dark room. They're going to slowly start to come to life just based on the light. All right, so all these areas where the light is hitting, I want to leave that blank paper. So maybe I was using a 6B to do that darkest shadow. I'm going to switch to a 2B and fill in that shadow closest to the darkest shadow. And I'm following these contours, thinking about those elevational shifts that are happening here. And then maybe I switch to an H for these lighter values that I was seeing in between all those light shapes on the bottom lip. I'm starting to fill those in. And again, I'm following those contours. And if I notice that some of my shapes were a little bit off, I can erase and redraw them, or maybe just redraw them with the value only. Just keeping that nice little soft tonal shading going, using the side of my pencil. And now I'm on that little wiener dog with the long nose, filling that in. Just bouncing around and just filling in all these little organic shapes with the value that I'm seeing in the photograph, and I'm making sure that I'm following those three-dimensional curves as I do it. So if it's a white space, I'm leaving it blank. If it's like a 2 on that value scale from 0 to 10, I'm trying to keep my value nice and light. And it is pretty light. It's a lot of 2s and 3s and 4s on the value scale on this bottom lip for sure. And on the top lip, it's a little darker. Maybe I switch to my HB. I'm noticing that curve out in this direction. And you can always put the value in just nice and lightly so that it's easy to erase if it's like this, where it's all a pretty light value, but then there's a few spots where we need a 0. And then you can go back in with your eraser and just pull it out. Like it might be easier to do that with my kneaded eraser. I can turn my kneaded eraser into a little point right here. And then I can just erase out those highlights rather than trying to go around them. And this all feels pretty light on the page right now, but as soon as I get everything kind of where I want it and start to darken up some of my values, it'll pop out a little bit more, especially when I go to 10 on that absolute 10 spot. And yeah, this little edge that I put on here when I was just drawing the shapes, now I'm seeing I really don't need an edge there. I want it to like really disappear. Like I said, butter melting on a piece of toast. It's just going to melt into the skin of the face. And then I'm looking for that three-dimensional dip here on this cone shape. And there might be a little shadow over here on the edge of the mouth that I didn't put in. Definitely the shadow underneath the lips. Okay, and then now I'm gonna go back in with my 6B again, now that I can see it a little better and see for sure where I want to put press down and give it that 10 value. And already recognize that it wasn't a solid line. It was more of a two-dimensional shape here, but it does get skinnier and fatter in some places where it does, you know, this dark value is, and it blends out, fades into that lighter shadow. And it dips right here again, the outer corner. So yeah, if I had done that right off the bat, I might have realized, oh, I need to make an adjustment, but I already pressed down so hard on my pencil that it's hard to erase that. So I think it's easier to take your time and build up to that dark pressure rather than commit to it from the start and have to try to take it away. Just like in life. So many metaphors for life as we're drawing here. All right, and then I'm just adding some of that value that I'm seeing on the top lip, following those contours. I think that's pretty good. It's a good place to stop. We've got lots of time for this third drawing. Maybe you're going to have some extra time at the end for some questions, or maybe I could go back and redraw one of these, something like that. We'll see. Okay, because yeah, we're way ahead of time here. Any questions about that drawing or any issues that anybody was having? Oh, I like what Carol said. Yeah, it's like a Polaroid developing. Oh yeah, and April was saying the front of the pencil is the tip. Yeah, exactly. The tip of the pencil. It's the front of the pencil versus the side of the pencil. All right. Any other questions or comments y'all want to add right now before we move on to this next lip drawing? I'm not seeing any, so I'm going to go ahead and move on. Okay, so we've got this 3/4 view graph, which is always tricky when there's a 3/4 view and you're not accustomed to drawing. Oops. When you're not familiar with the planes of the face and you're trying to draw 3/4 lip views, I feel like it is, or just a 3/4 face in general, I feel like there's a huge guessing game going on and people just kind of do their best and hope for the best, right? But if we start out looking at these planes, I think that it should really help and, demystify what's happening on a 3/4 view. And I'm going to pull out this little head tilt diagram from a while back. Hang on one second. I've got it right here. Okay, so I had a class over a year ago where we did just general facial proportions for kids and adults. And I don't have the adult diagrams right in front of me, but I did a couple of adult heads like this, just like I did with my kids' heads. And with this one of my daughter, she's facing pretty straight forward, but her head is tilted slightly. So we've got this vertical axis that goes down the center of the head, starting with the crown of the head, and then a horizontal axis that usually we put in line with the center of the eyes or around the eye line. And then whenever the person is turning their head to the side and not facing straight forward, well, we're looking at something three-dimensional and it's curved. So now that vertical line is not straight. Now it's a curved vertical line, and all of these horizontal lines are also on a curve. We had another class that just focused on head tilts, where we drew a model, Demetrius, and we drew a 3/4 view in opposite directions of Demetrius's head. And we added a little bit of value to this, but mostly we focused on the head tilt and the diagram of the head when the head is on a tilt like this. Okay, so The vertical center is off to the side on a 3/4 view. So we're not seeing equal parts of either side of the lips. We're seeing a little bit of, just think about like the moon. When the moon is 3/4 full, you're not seeing both sides of the moon in full. You're seeing 1/2 of the moon fully, and then you're seeing just part of like a sliver of the other part of the moon, the little quarter part, right? Okay, so that's what's happening here. Our vertical line is on a tilt, or is, curved to the side. It's curving out to this direction because my face is pointing that way. And so we're seeing this entire half of my lips, but then this half of my lips, my right side, but left for us, we're just seeing a part of it. So we're seeing these weird little shapes over here where it's being foreshortened. And foreshortening is where, like, let's think about a finger, the length of the fingers this long. We know all the finger length is there, but when I turn my finger facing you like this, there's all this information missing. Like, the information is there, all this information is there, but you can't see it. So it's foreshortened. Okay, so that's what's happening on the 3/4 view. There's a bit of information missing, but we don't want to draw the information that we can't see, because then it would make it not look the way that it actually looks. We want to just draw what we see, not what we think we see, right? Or what we know is there, but we can't see. Okay, so let's just draw these contours to start. Let me use I'm going to use my 4B right now. Let me flip to a page that I can't see anything underneath it here. Oh my goodness, I got stuff falling out of the sketchbook. Okay, so instead of drawing those two circles facing us right on top of each other, we can just draw maybe, well, no, we can still see both of the circles. So let's go ahead and start with both of the circles. Because really what's being eclipsed is the side of the mouth. So we can go ahead and do the 2 little circles and the 2 big circles to get us started. Okay. But on one side, we're gonna have a triangle that tapers off all the way over here, and then maybe a little line like a ramp coming off of it. And then on this side, we're only gonna go about that far, and then have a little triangle that does that. And then we'll have another little triangle coming off right here. A little rounded one. And then we've got our full shape over here. So that's a very generic, kind of feels like a fish, just going very general here. So always want to give you some general shapes to attach to. If that makes it more complicated than it needs to be for you, you can always just start drawing those value shapes. That's a good way to get started. And I'm going to actually take the side of my eraser and erase some of this because I don't want to get too attached to these general shapes, but that can definitely get us started here. But now I want to start to look at some of the more organic shapes that I'm seeing and start to notice these 3-dimensional planes. So I'm just looking at the photograph and seeing that there's this little ridge here that would have gone over my first little circle on the left. And then that triangle shape above that. And then I'm going to start to notice how the elevation is doing this. And I can see a little ridge doing that. I can see a little crease and wrinkle doing that there. And then there's a bit of a triangle, like call this the Cupid's bow right here in the center, right? Like a little upside down triangle there in the center of the lips. So we can draw that and then notice how on either side of that triangle, you know, that's where that circular curve is happening on either side. And I'm just going to go ahead and make it a hard outline just for now. And then I'm noticing that little ridge, it's organic, it's for the horizontal axis, it's not a perfect horizontal line, but there's a dip and a curve happening here across that little Cupid's bow. And then on the bottom lip, it feels more rounded here. So we can almost, yeah, get a sense of the spheres. Really does feel more spherical. We can see that big reflective light that's happening there. We could draw that shape of that reflective light nice and big right here if we wanted to, or we can wait and just notice how that reflective light is following across this elevational shift, this elevational dip and curve. I feel like I have a little bit too much confusing it here. I'm going to erase and just draw the contour lines. Okay, so I'm seeing a dip down on the horizontal axis. I'm seeing this curve down towards the bottom lip. It's not perfect, very organic. And then thinking about those spherical shapes, it curves like this. And right about here is where it seems to start to curve in the opposite direction. And I could just even see this like crease in the lips. The perspective on it appears to curve outward here. And then right here, it feels a little more straight. And then it's curving this way because where the camera was right about here. And so that makes sense that the kind of equator line on the vertical axis is right about there. So just like how when we're looking at a cylinder from above or below, those curves are going to change. Looking at a cylinder that's turned on its side from the side like this is going to change the directional curve of those contours. And then I've got this shadow underneath the lips, and I got some nice little wrinkles going over here. Okay, and then we're looking for that inverted cone shape here on the above the lip. And then we've got a pretty, it's not flat, it's going to radiate out in opposite directions here with a bit of a diagonal. And then it's just going to follow the same plane as the top of the top lip in a lot of places, you know, like that does. And then we've got that curve inward here for those planes. All right, so that's the very general idea of what the contours are doing, but we haven't added any value yet. So now we're going to add our value on top of this, and hopefully we drew our lines nice and light so that if we need to make any adjustments as we go, we can, because already I'm noticing I could maybe make my bottom lip come down a little farther. I do have a pretty pretty juicy bottom lip there. So it comes down a little farther than that. And then I've got the shadow underneath. So yeah, we're just not seeing quite as much of this this half of the lip as much as we are this half. Okay, so now we're going to look for those value shapes. We only looked at the value shapes to start with the last one, and now we're going to look at these value shapes here. But we've got our scaffolding of the contour lines to know where they're going to go. So still doing that game. I always play that game with myself. Does it have to be a line or can it be a shape? Even right here, like it does feel more of like a line right here for this dark, maybe 8 or 9 on the value scale, but I'm going to try to make it a double-sided shape if I can. Definitely is more of a double-sided shape over here. But I'm not going to fill it in yet. And I think I'm just going to erase out where this big highlight's going on the bottom lip. And then draw in those big highlight shapes. All right, and then I'm just gonna start using the side of my pencil to start to fill in some of this value. Well, I guess there was this shape, right? There's several more shapes, but I feel like with all the contours, it's kind of easy. Might be easier to just go ahead and just start filling in the value and then across these contours, and then we can erase out the highlights and go a little darker where we see the darker value. But most of the lips on this one are, I would say, like a 4 or a 5 on the value scale. It's pretty even across most of the lips, except for a few spots where it's a little darker. So I think we can get away with just taking the side of our pencil and starting to fill in with kind of a mid-tone shadow across most of them. And then if you go too dark, you can erase it out as long as you're using the side of your pencil instead of the front or the tip of the pencil, then it should be easy to erase. And then you've got everything blocked in the way you want it and you're satisfied. You can add that darker value where it goes all the way to black. The main idea is that we're making this value follow these contours. It's following the planes of the face. I'm just shifting my directional curve to the way I'm applying this value. And you could even go pretty like a super light, like a 2 on the value scale up here on the skin of the face, and then just erase out that highlight where it's a little lighter right above the lip and where the elevation is higher here at the top of that little peak. Anytime you've got a super light value and then you've got a highlight that's not coming across, it's easier to just go ahead and put that light value in. Sometimes people don't want to put that value in, especially on an area like this, because you're like, I don't want it to look like a mustache, right? But as long as you keep it nice and soft, then it shouldn't look that way, as long as it's nice and continuous and soft. And if it gets too dark, you can erase it back out. And then that's going to make those highlighted moments stick out even more than if just, as opposed to leaving it blank. Same thing with wrinkles, or like any creases on the face. People sometimes want to avoid those, even though that's what lends likeness, and makes a person look their age. We don't want somebody to look photoshopped and like they just have no lines on their face, because we have lines on our faces, right? But you just want to match the value. So if I were to put a 10 value, if I were to go all the way to 10 and fill in these wrinkles, well, then yeah, that's going to really emphasize those. But if I keep it nice and soft, then it should just look like, yeah, I've got some lines on my face because I'm a woman in my 40s. You just want it to be subtle. Okay. And then I think I'm ready to use the tip of my 6B pencil and get that dark shadow in there. And then start to blend in some of these darker values. All right. Well, I guess we could add these contours over here too. I didn't add these, but we've got this curved line. I'm just looking at this example where I added those curved lines as well for that shadow over here, but we already put that in. And but we've got contours that kind of radiate out like this across those planes. And then, yeah, those shadows underneath there. All right. Well, I cannot wait to see some of y'all's examples. I'm seeing a couple people saying they're doing well in the chat. That's always fun. I'm gonna switch to my forward-facing view here, and if you want to hold up your drawings for Chanel to spotlight you, I can see how you did. All right, there's Barbara. Oh, that's beautiful. Yes. Wow, I feel like you really captured my likeness there, Barbara, on both of those. And yeah, Elliot as well on the photograph of my daughter's lips. Really nice, subtle, soft value. Beautiful. Let's see, Graciela. Oh, that's gorgeous. Yes. Oh, that bottom one especially. Yeah, you captured some likeness as well. That is gorgeous. Oh my goodness, Patty. Yes, the drama. I love it. Wow, y'all all captured some really great likeness. I love how you erased out your highlights on that bottom one too, Patty. That was nice. And there's Sarah. Lovely, Sarah. Yes, I love those contours that you're adding on that bottom one, especially. That's really nice. Beautiful. Asiba drawn outside. I love it. Yes. Oh my goodness. These are so satisfying. And Patricia, that's also beautiful. Yeah, I'm really feeling that three-dimensional curve on those lips. That top one, especially that you just showed us. Lovely. And this is April. Yes, April. Oh my goodness. That is so beautiful. Okay, and that was that last one. You're taking your time, but wow. So yeah, y'all really just have made me so proud. You're just doing the thing, making it feel like it's just melting into the skin of the face around it because that value is so soft. And this is Autumn. Oh, that's just beautiful as well. So great. And Jean, oh, this is also so nice. Oh, I love those contours. Yes, and the one that was just the value in the middle, it's so soft. Yeah, and something like I usually say when I'm teaching drapery drawing is, think about the texture and we didn't talk much about the texture of the lips just being so soft. I mean, I definitely talked about keeping our value soft a lot, but y'all really just captured the softness in so many of these, that soft value or soft texture of lips. And this is Deb. Look at that. Deb, that middle one is just looks like it's about to start talking. So realistic. Thank you for all the wonderful feedback in the chat. I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you all so much. And this is Ian and Ariel. Oh yeah, look at that. Oh my God, that really looks like me. Those look like my lips. Something about that, like you captured a bit of an expression on my face there. That's really fun. And Diana, wow, that's also gorgeous, Diana. Yes. Wow. I can't stop looking at those. That's so beautiful. The two on the bottom, especially, you really just nailed it. That can't be your first time drawing realistic lips. Okay, good. I'm like, I can't take credit for that. That's amazing. All right. Yes. Another beautiful example. Yeah, look at those value shapes on that bottom lip. That's really just melting. All right. Thank you all so much. Well, we are done early here. We've got 8 minutes left. Are there any questions that I can answer for anybody? Yeah, April said we all have to start somewhere. That is true. Well, I hope that I illuminated some great places to start for you all. If this is your first time drawing lips, and yeah, check out these. What's the thing called between your nose and lip? That is a good question. What is this area called? Is that like a clef? Is that what I've heard? Like this is
I think it's the clef. I think you're right.
okay.
Oh,
And
Cupid bow.
the
Yeah.
Cupid bow. I always thought the Cupid bow was like this,
The
how
top of your lip.
the top and bottom lip, how they kind of create a little bow. Because there's like that triangle and then the two triangles on top. I could be wrong. I mean, it's all connected, so.
Right.
um, all right, well, I guess if there are no real questions, we can just give y'all some time back. Give you 7 minutes back of your time. We blew through those so fast. Um, oh, Pat Dunham had it, the frenum. Thank you. Frenum. That sounds right. All right. It's always good to know the anatomy names. I also highly recommend you get here. Actually, I have a couple of books. What did I do with those? I had them at the beginning of class and I set them off to the side. Let me see if I set them on my chair over here. Well, I don't know what I did with them, but I have a book on the anatomy. Oh, here it is right here. Just like a cheap little book like this. I got this on Thrift Books. It's called Heads, Features, and Faces. Getting books like this, I think, are really helpful to practice drawing facial features. You know, you can go to your half price books or anywhere like that and get a book like that on anatomy, you know, for the head, or anatomy for artists if you want to draw more of the figure. Those are really helpful to identify like the skull and all the planes of the face that we've been talking about. Carol's asking, what will the fall series be? Good question, Carol. Well, I mean, I'm working on planning. I've already got the September classes up right now. There's a class on purple passion flowers. We're doing a flower fundamentals class on purple passion flowers and painting it in watercolor. And then there's a class on watercolor techniques. So that'll be September. And then I am planning October classes right now. And I have a little still life that I set up that I was going to do for October. That's all I really have so far. If y'all have any requests, you're welcome to throw them out at me right now and maybe I can use them. But right now I'm just April saying hair and fur, drawing ears. Okay, maybe I could do an ear class. We had a class on skin tones last year, April, or maybe it was 2 years ago now, actually. It was a watercolor class. And if you just search skin tones and watercolor, it should come up. But I'd be happy to revisit that again. I was thinking about maybe doing a hand class again. We've done that in the past, but it's been a while. Teeth and hands. All right, these are all good suggestions, y'all. I'm gonna actually let me write them down right now before we go, or else I'm gonna be like telling myself I'll remember all of these. But so teeth, hands, skin tones again with dry media. Okay, maybe some chalk pastel skin tones. A good suggestion. I like it. I mean, we did draw my nose using the chalk pastels last month. The chalk pastel pencils, but yeah, we'd love to do that, more of that again with some darker skin tones for sure. That would be good. And what else was, someone else said something else that I wanted to write down. Oh, ears.
Yeah, ears, hair, and fur were the other ones I think you
Hair and fur. We had
didn't
another
write
class
down
on hair. Oh, it was a long time ago. I've been doing this for 3 years
a
now.
long time ago.
We had a hair class using colored pencils a long time ago. So that's definitely something that could come
I
back.
think you did one for pets too, which I think covered fur as well, right?
Oh, that's true. Yeah, we did pets and pen and ink. That was a long time ago as well. Yeah, you might, if you really like my teaching style and you're curious about some of these um, concepts, you can search the concept and my name on YouTube and you'll probably find a class because
Yeah.
I've got hundreds of videos now with Michael's over the past few years. Maybe not. Well,
Yeah, that's
would it be
usually how I
100?
find the classes when like you
Yeah.
tell me before if you're going to mention any of them.
Yeah, yeah. I'm like, it's hundreds because I've also done other classes with different organizations as well, but those are shorter, the hour or 90-minute classes with Michael's. I don't know if we're at 100 yet, but it's been 3 years, so there's quite a few.
Mhm.
Okay, well, thank y'all so much. And we definitely used up the rest of our time. Okay, hands, fingers. I appreciate that feedback, Lan. Thank you, Carol. All right, y'all. Thank you, Chanel. Y'all have a wonderful rest of your evening. Good night.